Confusion is a strategy, an unconscious strategy to not have to deal. I know this because I'm so confused all the time. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And the irony is once you decide to do, you figure it out. We're so used to being consumers. We're consumed and we think it's normal. And freedom is to release, have everything you need, but no more. Because the rest is just waste. We don't want junk. You want the stuff that gives you life. And to get access to that requires this real discipline. This discipline that happens on the daily of staying awake to, well, what do I want? What do I need to get what I want? And making sure that's all you have because everything else is just a distraction. But more than all of that, it requires action. If we're willing to front load the effort of deciding, we get this remarkable, enormous benefit. And it turns out that often gets us to the thing we want most, which is actually engaging in the reality that we're in. As humans, we prefer the path of least resistance. We crave convenience, the payoff without the price. But when our lives revolve around comfort, it doesn't deliver. Living in perpetual comfort leaves us weak and asleep. This podcast is an invitation to flip that script, to choose the unlikely path, to get the life you really want through voluntary discomfort. This is Strong and Awake. I'm Dane Sanders.
Dane, I've got a story for you.
I'm all ears, man.
I recently got back from a little staycation of all things, not even an actual long distance trip. And I was unpacking my bag and inevitably, this happens every time. I get to the bottom of the suitcase and I see shirts that are still folded that I never touched, like 4 pairs of underwear or 3 pairs of shoes that I never used. And this is something that comes up a lot for me for travel. I've gotten better at it over years, but this idea of overpacking, of loading up my suitcase or the metaphorical suitcase, if you will, with things that I don't need. And
you might need.
I might need them.
Yes.
I might need them. I wheeled this thing around. I was toting kids. I was carrying boogie boards. I was carrying so much weight. And while I managed to do it, I can imagine a much better experience had I not had that extra burden that I carried around that weekend.
Yeah.
And that leads us to what we're talking about today, which is this whole idea of traveling light. And obviously not just with air travel or vacations, but in life. Do you have any experiences like that, Dane?
Of course. Yes. Every day, all the time. And it's not just my own, it's also with my wife. Like, so let's say we're going on a car trip as opposed to a plane trip. And she's like, we have so much space in the car. Let's fill it. You know, what if, you know, and with to be fair, I do think it's a little easier for dudes than it is for ladies, in certain contexts, around, having the right thing in the right moment. I think guys can get away with a little bit, more, perhaps. At least that's the story I'm going to stay with to keep my marriage intact. But I will say this, even when you have space, if you don't leave it, if you don't go through, there's a labor that's required on the front end that it's a tax. It's a serious burden that you pay later, if you're not aware. But let's back up because again, this is a part of a series, right? Where we're talking about anchors to tether ourselves to reality, to kind of optimize our perspective relative to what it's like to navigate a very difficult world. And in particular, it's in response to 3 things. The first thing, and even though this is familiar territory for folks who listen regularly, it's always resourceful to pause and consider this trifecta and how it shows up every single day in all of our lives. So the first one is the drift, of course. It's this entropy, energy dissipating, second law of thermodynamics, why hot coffee turns cold. Its energy is always dissipating from our lives, whether we pay attention to it or not. And when we wake up, we have more energy than we do when we're going to sleep every day. So that's just a phenomenon that's true about the human condition. Second, another truth about the human condition is things happen to us. We call them whirlwinds at Men and Women of Discomfort. The whirlwind of being a human being are that things happen to you that you can't control. All you can control, as the Stoics say, is what you do in response. And as a result, the question then becomes, well, what ought we do in response to those things? And it turns out there's some really interesting things that we think that are uncomfortable that are very worth doing. And then the third part, of course, is we're never tempted to do the uncomfortable thing. We're tempted to do the comfortable thing, the convenient thing, the easy thing. And as a result, especially because our entire economic culture is built around this notion of getting something fast, quicker, easier, and all these promises of relief from the discomforts of life. Ironically, there's this higher call, this disciplined call to choose the uncomfortable path, the unlikely path to the life that most people want once they have it, but most people want the results without the process. So we talk a lot about the process, this practice, and part of it is anchoring ourselves to some big ideas. We've had a chance to talk about a lot of those already. We're about halfway through. But today's conversation around traveling light is particularly relevant in a world where we have so much, in a world of abundance where we can carry more. There's room in the car to put more stuff. I forget which law it is, but which is the law where whatever size of thing you have, you'll fill it to that size? Is that Peroty's law?
Is that Parkinson's law?
Parkinson's law. That sounds right. One of the P's. And it seems true. I used to be a professional photographer, and I remember the goal was to get, at the beginning of my career, the biggest bag I could, because I could carry all the gear. But by the end of my career, 12 years later, my goal was to have the smallest bag possible, because I would only be able to bring what I needed. And that's everything I needed and no more. And that was magic. And as I began to realize, and real part of it was discerning, like, what is significant, like relevant and necessary, and what isn't. And I get that it takes time to figure that stuff out. But as we figure that out, if we're willing to front load the effort of deciding, of actually removing options for later down the road, we get this remarkable, enormous benefit. No cognitive load, no this or that. This is what I got, and I'm going to make this work. And it turns out that often gets us to the thing we want most, which is actually engaging in the reality that we're in, not having options on how we could get out of it or do something different. And traveling light, it's also just, it's less of a burden. I'm reminded of like that old, you go for a long backpack hike, and you're carrying, 40, 60 pounds. My friend Mitch just climbed Denali, another Mitch in my life.
Yeah, not me. Not yet.
Different. Yeah. And dude's carrying 80, 100 pounds worth of gear.
Wow.
And he gets to camp, to pause and set up camp, because that's what he was carrying, was the entire camp on his back. And he gets there and he gets to take it off. And you imagine the relief of like taking that burden off. Well, what if you didn't have to put it on in the first place? What if you actually got to walk the path because you made the hard choices early to have the better hike later, even if it meant you had a few less options once you stopped and took the pack off?
Yeah, and my hunch is that your friend Mitch is like an ultralight backpacker. He probably is very disciplined about what he brings and what he doesn't bring, yet still this has a tendency to creep in to even those that are practicing this proactively. So again, this is not something that you just do once and then forget about it. This is a daily practice, which of course we'll get into later. But I think
let's go further. It's an hour practice, like
moment by moment.
Like, do I have everything I need? What else am I carrying? And do I really need all of these pieces or not? And I found that, one of the little hacks, I wasn't planning on pulling this up, but it just happens to be on my left, is, and we referenced it earlier, it's just like, get a smaller backpack, the smallest backpack you can find. And then go, well, that's the constraint. I'm going to live within that constraint and only put in the important stuff first. And if I have to upgrade that backpack, at least I've gone through a process of discernment. But oftentimes, I actually have plenty of space in the small backpack, plenty, and what or no backpack. Crazy! What in the world? How do you do that? Well, you get in front of it, and it's not lost on me that last time we were together, we talked about fueling first, and it's not. It's amazing how these tethering ideas can complement so well because when you put fuel in the tank early, you need fewer accessories to navigate life. So you have the fuel you need, and oftentimes, especially from a minimalistic perspective, you have most everything from there. That's sufficient, especially if you've been in a practice over and over and over again, day in, day out, practicing things like fueling first and actually constantly purging, being a minimalist. One last example, there was a year where I decided to travel light in my house, and there was two major initiatives. The first was every day. The one was at the end of the year. And what I did was every week, and it contributed to every day, I got a big white kind of bin, and my job was to fill that bin every week and get rid of it on the weekend at Goodwill. And I would do that again and again. I did 52 times, had 52 little receipts to prove it. And can imagine like how relieving it felt just to carry less stuff in my home. And then we actually, at the end of that year, actually got to move. And we actually, instead of getting a truck to move, we actually got a dumpster to throw basically our attic away. And not only were we saving money, because we didn't have to, like the same money we would have spent to move it and store it again, we got rid of it and never had to carry that burden again. Remarkable to me. And the relief, I couldn't believe the emotional relief it created just by purging.
And I think you're getting to something which I'd love to get to here, which is like, obviously there's very apparent and embodied examples of traveling light, the weight that we're carrying. But there's also these other categories of traveling light that might be a little bit harder to first recognize, but they become very apparent once you become kind of aware of them, whether that's mental or emotional. And of course, these aren't just categories, but these are kind of the ripple effects of any of these categories. So we are carrying extra physical weight. Well, that is likely to ripple into mental, emotional, other weights that we're carrying. So I'd love to kind of categorize those and then, talk a little bit about how we kind of become aware of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. One of the things we do at MWOD at the end of every round is everyone who does MWOD loses, especially their first time. If they were overweight, they lose a tremendous amount of weight, usually kind of in the 30 to 50 pound range over the course of 12 weeks. And one of the final exercises we do is we get them to take the weight that they lost, put it in a backpack and carry it for a particular workout. And then at the end of it, they get to take it off, and it's profound for them. They're like, I carried this every single day. And now I have this privilege because of the work I did for 12 weeks to take it off, and I never have to put it back on again if I don't want to. And that's really cool. But it's one of the challenges that reveals is we are carrying it and we don't know that we're carrying it. It's just, we're unaware that it's normal. That's just normal. And when it comes to the categories you're talking about, Mitch, these other significant real burdens that we carry mentally, let's just call it in a broad category, mental, worries about other people. My wife and I were brand new empty nesters. So we used to care about diapers and with the kids like not running to the street. And now we're concerned about very different things, that kids at college and beyond college and choices and friends. And it's terrifying. Unless somehow we can be conscious that, gosh, we're preoccupied with certain ideas, certain emotions, that we actually could rid ourselves of. It's funny, folks who have faith traditions like Christianity, where the idea of like giving your burdens over to a deity to carry on your behalf. That's a kind of sense of traveling light for people who are privileged enough to have access to that sort of thing. I think folks who have relationships that they're preoccupied with, especially needy relationships where it feels like you need to save people in your life. And if you don't, their world's going to come to an end. And sometimes it really is that grave. Most of the time, though, it's just in your head. You think it's critical for you to concern yourself, as if concerning yourself, getting all tied up in a knot about it is somehow helping someone in the physical universe. Probably not. Now, if you want to bring them a meal, or if you want to, send them a note to encourage them, that's great. but that's not carrying them in the same way. In fact, you ought to do those things so that you can release it, so that you can travel light. But the first step is to even notice, you're carrying the burden, to notice you're carrying the cognitive load. And usually that comes from slowing your own self down long enough to just pay attention to. It's kind of like what you were describing at the beginning of the show, where to stop and look in the backpack. Like, do I really need these 5 shirts and 3 pairs of shoes? Or if you've gone on several trips in a row and you go, I really thought I needed those things, and on 3 trips in a row, you never pulled them out. Well, do an experiment. Like, get a bag half the size that necessitates you can't carry them anyways, and see how you go. And except for maybe about 20 seconds of like, oh, I wish I had brought that thing I used to own or I own at home, you won't even notice. You won't even, except what you'll notice is how rad it is to not have to carry all that crap around.
Totally. And going back to like the fueling first metaphor, like having a full tank means you don't have to carry the extra jerry cans, all the food that you'll ever need, because you can make it to the next rest stop. It's right. Like, that's part of it too, is, it's like going on a vacation and not bringing a jacket. Well, 9 times out of 10, you're fine. And then the one time that you're not, like, that's okay. Like, I can go out and get it, or I can endure and learn something from this. So there's all kinds of benefits that we're not considering because we're, being a little bit too concerned with these costs that we think exist out there.
Yeah, these what ifs. It's funny. One of my favorite surprise exercises that we do at MWOD is Ghostbusters. So, about 4 or 5 weeks into the round, I think it is roughly, we do this surprise challenge. And I'm sharing this with people who have never done MWOD necessarily, but you'll forget all about this until it comes up. So don't worry. But the surprise is we say, look, first go for a run. Go for a run for 1 mile. And on that 1 mile, carry nothing, like have no input. So we actually help you not, we help you travel light right out of the gate. So it's just you and you're out there. And while you're out there, your job is to tune into yourself to notice who are the ghosts that you're carrying around, who has real estate in your mind that you're giving away for free, that maybe you need to forgive someone or ask for forgiveness from someone, some unreconciled relationship, and that, or during that mile, at the end of the mile, you stop and your job is to call that person, leave a message if you need to, but do something active to travel lighter, to get the ghost out, to bust it out. And then after that first mile, you do it again for a second mile, second ghost, third mile, third ghost, fourth mile, fourth ghost. At the end of 4 miles, it could take you less than an hour, or it could take you half your day. But the stories we've heard of people who go, I haven't talked to my brother in 7 years. And I'm traveling light. Like it has this weird connection between having a feeling of release is real. It's feels like weight off your shoulders, and yet we're carrying this all the time. And even the metaphor of running, like, that I'm an endurance athlete. I do long distance ultra runs on trail, and when you do that, folks who run, even if you're a casual runner and you see people wear those funny little short packs that kind of go just below your chest and they kind of wrap around almost like a little vest. Those are for ultra runners. And it's not lost to me how small they are, because you want the smallest container possible to carry everything you need. And that ultralight approach, again, whether it's in physical or it's in the mental, it makes a massive, massive difference. But I'm curious for you, Mitch, in those moments where you are tempted to overpack, right? To bring the bigger bag out. If there were fears that were going on for you that kind of incentivize you to bring more than you need, what do you think you might be scared of? If there were fears?
Sure. If I'm thinking strictly of packing, it's being unprepared, not having what I need, not having what I need for others.
Because you're responsible for so many people. Sure. Well, where this is fun for me is, can you go one more step and let's get out of the packing metaphor for a second? Sure. And why do you think you carry around the mental burden with people you have unresolved stuff with, as opposed to traveling light?
I think oftentimes, I think it's easier in the moment. I make the easy choice and get the hard life that follows of it's too uncomfortable to release this thing, to acknowledge this, to be vulnerable. So I'd rather just kind of like carry it. I'll just carry it. And the problem is like, maybe, I mean, even if it's just one thing that you're carrying, that compounded, it's like if, you know, you just added 1 mile to your, or 1 pound to your pack on your ultra marathon, you know, you're running 50 miles, 100 miles. Like that is significant. I mean, any ultralight backpacker will tell you that. That's why they're trying to squeeze out the, you know, a couple ounces out of this and a couple ounces out of that to make it the lightest as possible, because it compounds. And I've done that a lot of times out of that fear, the fear of that vulnerability, or, you know, what if I'm not enough, or overcommitting too, because it's like, well, what if they perceive me differently if I don't do this thing? Or what does it say about me? How will this shift how I show up in the world if I'm not doing all these things? So yeah, there's all kinds of things that are upstream of those small little choices of traveling a little bit less light than I need to be.
I found too for myself that there's moments where I might say like, well, I don't know how to resolve that. I don't know how to get that out of my head. They're not going to be open to that conversation, or if it's kind of relational, or I don't know what to pick first. Like there's a sense of confusion. And one of the things I've noticed for myself is confusion is a strategy, an unconscious strategy to not have to deal. And I treat it like that. In fact, I know this because I'm so confused all the time. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And the irony is, once you decide to do, you figure it out. Like here's the thing. If you have unresolved stuff with somebody, dial the number and you'll figure it out before they pick up. You'll figure it out once the conversation begins. The hardest part, like every good salesman knows, is the 800-pound phone that you got to pick up in the first place. It feels like a lot to get started, but it's amazing how quickly we can purge. I had this experience back in that moving experience we mentioned earlier, and I've shared this story in different spots, hopefully not recently here, but we were moving and we found, I think the number was 300 pounds worth of old tax documents, just paper. 300 pounds of paper, and we paid $96 to have it shredded. So I lugged it downstairs, put it in the car, took it to a professional shredder, shredded it. And I couldn't believe it. And for years I was like, no. What if I get audited? What if I need that stuff? I need this. And this is like, wasn't 7 years of tax records. This was like 20 years of tax records. Like I'd given myself this weird narrative as an excuse to not actually do the thing that was right in front of me that instantly created benefit. And like it's one of those things where the moment you do it, you benefit, but you don't experience the benefit until you've done it. And that's the rub. It's like there's a sense of like there's a lead action to get a lag benefit. And whenever that's in place and you're aware of it, you're crazy to not get after the lead metric right away. Even though you won't feel it when you go upstairs into the attic and grab the paper, it's guaranteed that moments from then, you will have the lag experience of utter like joy, like bliss. It's so guaranteed. And even as I say this, I know there are listeners who are going, oh, I should clean up my attic. I have a junk drawer, or I have a garage. And what I'm not asking you to do is think about it right now. More what I'm asking you to do is put your earphones on, keep listening, and walk out to your garage and pick up one thing. Like one thing. The lead effort to pick up the one thing and go, I'm not going until this finds its proper place, which is probably the trash, where you pull a Marie Kondo and you say thank you and you put it in the trash. You are right on the cusp. We're all right on the cusp of creating this incredible blissful experience simply by getting rid. We're so used to being consumers. We're consumed and we think it's normal. And freedom is to release,
Mm-hmm.
to say thanks and let it go.
Yeah. I think this whole thing about lead and lag metrics is important. And it goes back to one thing that you said is like one of those lead strategies, or one of the things to focus on is like, what's the container that you're bringing along? Bring a smaller backpack. That will automatically limit your optionality, limit your choices, which will actually buy you more freedom. It's such a backwards thing in our culture.
Yeah.
Yet it's so liberating.
Yeah.
If we've ever if someone's ever gone through the unfortunate experience of, losing their home to a fire, or, something of that kind of category of destruction, I just talked to a friend that this happened to her. Lightning struck outside of her house and caught her whole apartment on fire. Wow. And while she's grieving that, while she feels unsettled, she also articulated this little bit of like freedom, like, realizing, wow, not only did I not need all of that stuff, but all of my clients that I was supporting, all of these social media posts that I was posting, thinking that this was so essential. Well, I couldn't do that by necessity because I didn't have internet. I didn't have a home. I was sorting all this out. And actually, my business went up in that month. So I think it's really important too to think about, like you said, that experiment. Like, what if you just brought a smaller bag? What if you just committed to fewer things? What if you quit this thing and tried it on for size and saw what that limited optionality actually gave you, which is kind of a theme of a lot of what we do at MWOD, limiting that optionality and that backwards freedom that gives you.
There's a great little documentary that came out in the early 2000s called The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard. And she talks about, like, it's really framed around consumerism and how we're getting suckered into buying and getting more stuff. And the perception that if we don't get the latest and newest, but it understates, in her context, like the environmental impact of just living in a consumption world. And kind of goes so far as to say, like, well, what are your consumption habits, and how can you advocate for more, not more stuff, but more life? And what I'm struck by, even as I reflect back on that old thing that I remember when I first saw it, it kind of arrested me for a minute. What's exciting, I think, is to realize that we can do something about that, like right now. Little habits. Like, one habit I have is I love to take stuff. I love Amazon. I love, like, the phenomenon of living like no king ever lived before the era that we're in, where I could, at a beck and call, have something arrive at my door, anything at my door. And that magic that is this miracle called distribution and all that Amazon's created. And yet it's so easy. And I'm never without want. Oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? And I must have it. And to get into the habit of, like, a different habit, which is, I'm so drunk in my ability to get what I want. What if I actually put it in my wish list as opposed to putting it in my shopping cart, just for a night? And I can't tell you how much money I've saved just by waking up the next day and going, that was a bad idea. I didn't need that. I thought I needed it. I was convinced I needed it, but I was deceived. And the impact of stuff, that whole notion of, like, what you own owns you, or even attaching to things, is such a insidious, like, contributor to real burden that people carry. It's as real as this table I'm touching. And yet we don't treat it like that. We treat it like, oh, it's fine. Options are good. I want more options. And options are often a curse. Because I talk to my kids as they're trying to figure out adulting, and they have so many options. They're paralyzed. They just feel stuck, totally stuck. And if they or you or I would just narrow constrain the focus, all of a sudden there's a liberation that people experience, a sense of, like, okay, I'm going to get a job in a geographical region or in a particular industry. It's not every job. It's in this particular lane. And I know it's going to be hard in the front end, but I'm going to put myself in a position of possibility by committing to someone. Even I would argue, like the relational burdens that people feel like if I pick one person to date or to marry, that means I'm saying no to millions more. And it's just in your head, because all the while you're missing out on the benefits that come from choosing the one, and working through those things. And I don't mean to be flippant about making those kinds of choices, but there is something profound that you can only get once you've made the decision to narrow rather than broaden.
Yep. I fully agree. And I've been there so many times. Yeah. One of my favorite musicians exercises this kind of creative constraints in his music. His name's Ryan O'Neal, and he goes under the moniker Sleeping at Last. And he does this with his music. He's like, he experienced that kind of paralysis. And instead of, okay, I just need more plugins and more instruments and more collaborators, he instead kind of pared down and said, you know what, I'm going to write a song with these constraints. It has to be in this key with these instruments. And I need to incorporate for the lyrics my favorite films of this year. And the output of those super restrictive constraints are some of the most beautiful songs and creativity that I've experienced. And it's just crazy what that reduction in optionality does. So what are some things that we can kind of do, like recapping? Obviously we have like the reflection component. We have the kind of just take the first step, focus on that lead metric. What's a kind of recap and some anchor actions for our listeners today?
Yeah, I think if you don't notice, it's very difficult. So first of all, if you've listened this far into the podcast and you're like, yeah, of course. But even if you've been practicing this and some new things don't come to mind, I'd encourage you to go back and hit play again, because there's something that's missing. Could it be that there's still more to appreciate about what this idea is? And I'm not asking you to go back and listen for our sake. It's more that if on the heels of this, you don't find yourself kind of looking around whatever room you're in and going, is my desk too cluttered? Is my mind too cluttered? Are my emotions too cluttered? Am I worried? Kind of freaked out. The line we have in our family all the time is, why pray when you can worry? Because we all laugh at like how silly worrying is, right? How futile it is. Well, the way to get rid of worry is to pray, right? It's to give it away, to not have to carry the burden. And that as a first step is just critical, that we just notice that we have more than we need. And again, I've said this a couple times, but I really want to emphasize it. What I'm not saying is that you live in some austere context where you don't have what you need. What we're saying is have everything you need, but no more. Be ruthlessly minimalistic, just what you need, because the rest is just waste. And it literally could be as little as like you put too much toothpaste on your toothbrush. Like you don't need that much, just put a little, or it could be you leave the fridge open, or you leave the water running, or, you don't need it. Just get what you need and no more. And even to pause and consider, well, what do I need? If I was going to have a fantastic day today, what's the least I could need to get that day to be so? But it does require some noticing, some thoughtfulness, some care. But more than all of that, it requires action. It just requires like opening your junk drawer and picking one thing up at a time and going, I'm not going to stop until this finds its proper place, until it goes in the spot that it needs to go. And in some cases, it's the trash. In other cases, it's Goodwill. And other cases, it's maybe a different drawer, a drawer that would be more appropriate, that you could access it when you need it, but not perpetually all day long. I think the metaphor of a junk drawer is emblematic of everything we're talking about. Like, why do you have a junk drawer? Well, you have a junk drawer because you haven't made the decision of where things ought to go. You've decided, I'm just going to dedicate that backpack to just carrying. But imagine opening your junk drawer and having empty space. Space is incredible. It's full of possibility. But when we fill it with stuff, emotional, physical, or otherwise, it's just junk. It's a junk drawer. We don't want junk. You want the stuff that gives you life. And to get access to that requires this real discipline. This discipline that happens on the daily, even within a day, of staying awake to, well, what do I actually need? What do I want? What do I need to get what I want? And making sure that's all you have, because everything else is just a distraction. It's beyond the minimal viable dose of what you need. And I think when you can begin to have that as a default starting point to after you've fueled first, to travel light, you'll, to your point earlier, you'll need less fuel to get further along. And the experience itself is just so much more enjoyable. Even if it's a difficult part of the experience, it's going to be a lot less burdensome if you're carrying less weight.
Mm-hmm. And I'd be kind of remiss to kind of omit the importance of like not going it alone too. We've got a community of a lot of people that are traveling light. If you've ever been on a backpacking trip, it helps to go with others, and not just for safety reasons, but just the morale and just to be on a journey with others, I think is so valuable.
Or to even help you notice that you're carrying more than you need.
100%.
Yeah. Like, are you sure you need that cast iron sink on this backpack, Mitch? I don't know. I know something could come up, but I don't know. Might be just fine without it.
Yeah, there's no bears on this trail. Why are you bringing everything in a bear can? Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to be home by dinner. Like, what do you? What? But just in case, I get that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in the spirit of traveling light and essentialism, as Greg McEwen kind of coined that phrase, or at least popularized it. I think we've said what we need to say in this episode, and I'd love for people to take action. And one of the ways that you can take action is if this is striking a chord. Obviously, we've shared a number of things that you can do right now to kind of lighten your load. And one of the things that you can do too is, check out MWOD.io. Like, go there. We've got a community of folks that are pursuing the same thing, that are traveling light, that are rooting themselves and anchoring themselves in a lot of these ideas that we're exploring in this. But the biggest part is that it's embodied. We're not just putting ourselves on the hook. We're not just committing to something. We're actually following through and are holding account for those things. So
following through, especially when you don't want to, especially when you're like, yeah, I love the idea of an empty attic, but we're actually going to stand with you while you go empty your attic.
Yeah.
And that's I think the part that's, to your point earlier about community, it becomes so magical. Like, both the weight of the burden of purging doesn't feel as awful when others are doing the same. And there's also a sense of, like, at least for me, the people that I do hard things right alongside, they become my favorite people in the world. Like, there's a bonding impact that happens when you do hard things together. And, if not MWOD, where are you doing that in your life? You got to find some place to do that in your life, because this is not meant to be a solo, like, Lone Ranger experience life. We're meant to do this together, but you want to do it together with like-minded folks who want the same kinds of things. So if there's things that you're drawn to today around carrying less burden, I know there's people listening to this. Just go to MWOD.io/apply and apply. Jump in. Even if you just fill the answers for yourself, that'll help you identify some of the extra burden that you're carrying and give you a clearer path to get after it. But what we want for you is to actually, and for us, because we would be better if you were part of this, would be for you to join in what we're doing together and consider becoming a man or woman of discomfort.
On that note, we'll wrap it there. Thanks, Dane.
Thanks, Mitch. This is season 1 of Strong and Awake, the Unlikely Path podcast. Men and Women of Discomfort is our membership community, and we are open to everyone. But keep in mind, our tagline is, "It's probably not for you." If we're wrong about that, or if you want to find out for yourself, you can find us at MWOD.io.